These headlines. President Moon Jae-in calls for a fourth summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to help salvage the stalled nuclear talks between Pyongyang and Washington. He says he'll meet Kim anywhere, anytime. South Korea remembers the 304 victims of the Sewol-ho ferry sinking, which happened 5 years ago to the day. A memorial ceremony will be held in the city where most of the victims were enrolled as high school students. Plus, horrific devastation in the French capital. The Notre Cathedral in Paris is engulfed in flames. The iconic spire is lost as firefighters race to save what's left. Our top story this morning, President Moon Jae-in has expressed his hopes for another summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. He says he hopes to sit down with Kim whenever the North is ready for detailed discussions on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Our Park Hee-jun starts us off.
President Moon Jae-in says there should be another inter-Korean summit soon.
이제 남북 정상회담을 본격적으로 준비하고 추진할 시점입니다. 북한도 대화를 지속하겠다는 의지를 보여주었습니다.
During Monday's cabinet meeting, he commented for the first time on North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's speech at the Supreme People's Assembly. He said Kim reaffirmed his commitment to achieving peace and denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula and sitting down for the third time with U.S. President Donald Trump. Moon said Kim has also shown his willingness to implement inter-Korean agreements, and he called for a fourth inter-Korean summit when the North is ready.
북한의 형편이 되는 대로 장소와 형식에 구애되지 않고 남과 북이 마주 앉아 두 차례의 북미 정상회담을 넘어서는 진전된 결실을 맺을 방안에 대해 구체적이고 실질적인 논의를 할 수 있기를 바랍니다.
The South Korean president also said he and President Trump agreed to work together to bring North Korea back to the nuclear negotiations. They also reaffirmed the importance of top-down diplomacy based on the trust and determination of the leaders themselves for the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. There was, however, no mention of any plans to send a special envoy to North Korea. But President Trump has asked President Moon to let him know Pyongyang's stance as soon as possible. And with the South Korean president ready to meet Kim, it's possible that the trip could take place during his three-nation Central Asia tour, which begins Tuesday. President Moon has officially put a fourth inter-Korean summit on the table. Sending a special envoy to Pyongyang will accelerate preparations for the summit, which will also lead to further progress on his peace drive on the Korean Peninsula, something he says is a matter of survival. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
Now, US President Donald Trump says talk is okay with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, adding he does not need the process to move too quickly. During a speech in Minnesota on Monday, President Trump reiterated North Korea's denuclearization is moving along and his relationship with Kim is very good. He added talks with Pyongyang are moving along perfectly, saying there's a lot of constructive things going on, without elaborating on the details. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is calling for North Korea to carry out its denuclearization pledge before the end of this year. Such a remark is seen as a response to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's speech last week, during which he said Pyongyang will wait until the end of 2019 for Washington to come up with a courageous decision. Speaking in Texas on Monday, Pompeo praised Kim's mentioning of a possible third summit between the two sides. He stressed dialogue is happening all the time with the North without going into the details. South Korea's foreign ministry will establish a new bureau specializing in China affairs and a division focused on implementing UN Security Council sanctions on North Korea. The ministry has put on public notice a proposed revision to the current enforcement regulations on its organizational structure. There have been increasing calls for setting up a separate bureau in charge of China to boost its diplomatic capability on the four major powers, the US, China, Japan and Russia. The process is expected to be completed by early May. Now, President Moon Jae-in embarks on an 8-day trip to 3 Central Asian nations in the coming hours. Our Shin Se-min reports.
President Moon Jae-in will be on the road for more than a week visiting Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. He hopes to improve relations on the economic and political fronts while earning support for his administration's peace drive on the Korean peninsula.
The three Central Asian nations the president will tour are some of the major partners of the administration's new Northern policy drive.
For 3 days from Tuesday, the president will be in Turkmenistan's capital, Ashgabat, where he will sit down with President Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov for talks on strengthening strategic partnerships, including making it easier for South Korean firms to make inroads into the country. He will also tour a $3 billion petrochemical plant site in Kyanli that was built by a global consortium led by Korea's Hyundai engineering company. President Moon continues on to Uzbekistan on Thursday for a 4-day stay. The South Korean leader will hold a summit with the president there and address parliamentarians in a bid to improve bilateral ties in fields such as the medical and tech industries. The last stop of President Moon's three-nation trip ends in Kazakhstan. The South Korean leader will hold a summit with his newly inaugurated counterpart, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, as well as the country's first president, Nursultan Nazarbayev. They're expected to talk about the so-called Kazakh model of denuclearization, something that allowed the country to accumulate wealth in return for ditching its nuclear weapons. It's also a model U.S. President Donald Trump pitched to North Korea for its own denuclearization. President Moon will also attend a repatriation ceremony for the remains of the 2 Korean independence fighters who were buried in Kazakhstan. He will also push to bring home the remains of General Hong Bum-do, a fighter who stood against Japan's colonial rule of Korea in the early 1900s. On his first trip to the region, the president hopes to strengthen friendly relationships with the 3 countries and help lay the groundwork for future partnerships under the new Northern Policy Initiative. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, if you see people wearing one of these yellow bows here in South Korea today, you'll know that it's in remembrance of one of the darkest days in the country's modern history. South Korea marks the 5th anniversary of the Sewol-ho ferry sinking on this Tuesday. A memorial service will be held at 3 p.m. Korea time in Ansan, just south of Seoul, where Danwon High School is located. More than 260 students and teachers from that school died when the ferry capsized in waters off Korea's southwestern coast on April 16th, 2014. A total of 304 people passed away. Other memorial services will be held across the country as well. It goes without saying that we'll have continuing coverage of this solemn anniversary throughout the day here on Arirang TV. Now, Gumho Asiana Group has decided to put its controlling stake in Korea's second biggest carrier, Asiana Airlines, up for sale. The move comes as the group tries to avoid a liquidity crisis. Lee Seung-jae with the details.
Gumho Industrial, the largest shareholder of Asiana Airlines, says its board has decided to sell its 33.47% stake in the airline as part of the group's plan to stave off a liquidity crisis. In a statement on Monday, the group said the decision was made to sell the controlling stake so the group and the airline can regain market trust. The carrier subsidiaries, including Air Busan, Asiana IDT, and others, will be sold together as a package. Gumho Industrial's stake is worth nearly $265 million, but adding in premiums for the managing rights of these subsidiaries, the total value of the deal is expected to top $880 million. According to Korea Development Bank, the group's main creditor, Gumho's former chairman Park Sam-gu has requested over $440 million in loans in return for selling the carrier. The group's decision to sell its controlling stake in Asiana Airlines comes amid a group liquidity crisis as its debts continue to rack up. At the end of last year, Gumho Asiana Group's total liabilities stood at over $3 billion, with almost half due to be paid back by the end of this year. However, The most urgent debt is nearly $53 million in bonds that are due by April 25th. If Kumo Asiana Group fails to repay on time, its credit rating will drop to junk level. So far, local conglomerates SK, Hanwha, and CJ are among a number of corporations being mentioned as potential buyers for Asiana. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Now, with the fine dust crisis continuing to grip South Korea, the Seoul City government has announced new measures to try and tackle the public health issue. Fed up citizens, however, are continuing to demand more active countermeasures to clean up the air we all have to breathe here. Kim Mok-yeon reports.
With March recording the worst fine dust pollution on record in Seoul, the city government unveiled a list of measures it will take to try and tackle the issue. Compared to 2016, the fine dust and ultra-fine dust problem has worsened at concerning levels, especially in densely populated areas such as Seoul and Gyeonggi-do Province. In a bid to combat the problem, high-emission vehicles will be restricted from entering the center of Seoul beginning in July. Seoul City also plans to cooperate with private delivery companies to replace about 100,000 motorcycles by 2025 and distribute 1,000 electronic motorcycles to franchises by the end of this year. Mid-sized town buses that run on diesel and school buses for young children will also gradually be switched to electric buses. The city also plans to cut household emissions by replacing 900,000 old heaters with eco-friendly models by 2022. However, concerned citizens say that this is not enough.
Citizens gathered in front of Seoul's Gwanghwamun Square on Monday afternoon in the latest protest calling for the government to come up with more concrete measures to tackle the nation's worst fine dust crisis.
Participants, who are mostly part of an online community calling for action against fine dust, said that they came to the rally so that their voices could better be heard.
The first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is check the fine dust levels. I hope the government can adopt the measures they announced as soon as possible.
I think there is progress on reduction efforts, but I believe more could be done so that my children can live in a country where they can breathe freely.
The government's measures seem very helpful, but I think we need to come up with a fundamental solution and find the root of the problem.
Although acknowledging the government's efforts to cope with the fine dust issue, concerned citizens continue to call for more aggressive steps in hopes of clearing South Korean skies. Kim Mok-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, BTS has landed at #1 on the Billboard 200 once again, rewriting yet another chapter in K-pop history. According to the official Billboard website, on Monday, the boy band's new album, it is called Map of the Soul Persona, released last Friday, has already hit the pinnacle of Billboard's main album chart. This is the third time a BTS album has scored a Billboard #1 after their last albums Love Yourself Tear and Love Yourself Answer achieved the same feat. Let's start our world news then. Only one place we can start really, and that's in France. A huge fire broke out at the world-famous Notre Cathedral in the heart of Paris. It's still a fluid situation there. For more on this and other news from around the world, let's turn to our Hong Yu. So, Hong Yu, just give us the latest on this blaze so far.
Well, Mark, after hours of flames spreading through the cathedral, the Notre Dame fire is now under control. The secretary to the French Interior Minister said both towers of the Notre Dame Cathedral are safe after flames were seen spreading to one of Notre Dame's iconic rectangular towers. Yet large parts of the roof already appear to have been burned, and the spire collapsed during the fire. At least 7 fire trucks and 400 firefighters worked to put the flames out, both from the interior and the exterior. Police have urged everyone to avoid the area, and emergency services are pushing people away from the scene. Parisians and tourists watched in horror the flames spread to other parts of the cathedral. Witnesses in the scene said ash and embers were falling from the sky as flames progressed through the cathedral. The fire is known to have begun at 6:30 p.m. local time, and police are saying it probably began accidentally and could be linked to the undergoing restoration work within the 850-year-old building. The Paris prosecutor's office has opened an investigation into the devastating fire. French President Emmanuel Macron at the scene described the fire as a terrible tragedy and announced that he will launch an international fundraising campaign to rebuild Notre Dame Cathedral starting from Tuesday. 2019 is shaping up to be a very bad year for measles, with outbreaks of the contagious disease on the rise in many parts of the world, including the U.S., a country with high overall vaccination coverage. Kim Yoo-sung reports.
The World Health Organization says the number of measles cases recorded 110,000 worldwide in the first quarter of 2019, a 300% increase from the same period last year. In a statement released on Monday, the agency explained that many countries are in the midst of sizable measles outbreaks, with all regions of the world experiencing sustained rises. It also noted the actual number of measles cases could be higher, as only about 1 in 10 actual measles cases were reported. According to the WHO, spikes in case numbers were also witnessed in countries with high overall vaccination coverage, including the U.S., which is experiencing its second worst outbreak in nearly 2 decades. The contagious disease has spread fast among clusters of unvaccinated people within the country. The city of New York declared a public health emergency in parts of Brooklyn last week, following a measles outbreak in an Orthodox Jewish community where anti-vaccination campaign has been spreading due mainly to religious reasons. Nearly 300 cases were reported in New York City alone. As of April 11th, the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention has confirmed 555 measles cases since the beginning of the year. Cases were found in 20 states, including California, Florida, and Texas. Kim Yoo-sung, Arirang News.
Researchers in Israel have printed the world's first 3D heart with blood vessels using a patient's own cells, something they say could replace diseased organs. The team at Tel Aviv University plan to transplant the heart into animals in a move they hope will advance possibilities for human transplants. Their findings were published on Monday in Advanced Science, a peer-reviewed scientific journal. The heart can currently contract, but several challenges remain as the artificial heart needs to learn how to function like a real heart. The world's largest airplane built by Stratolaunch has completed its first test flight over the Mojave Desert in California. The immense aircraft, called Rock, has a wingspan wider than a football field and is powered by 6 engines on a twin fuselages. The plane is designed to drop rockets and other space vehicles weighing up to at an altitude of 35,000 feet and has been built by the company to make satellite deployment easy. According to Stratolaunch, the first test flight was meant to test its performance and handling qualities.
You know what that title means by now. It's time for our Life and Info segment, where we focus on information that's hopefully useful for your everyday life. For those of us looking to lose a couple of kilograms, a tape measure is just as useful as a weighing scale a lot of the time. A study of 23 million adults here in Korea shows a link between thickening waistlines and an increased risk of early death. Park Se-young with more.
It's long been known that obesity increases the risk of many health problems, and having excess belly fat can pose even more serious danger. According to data collected from 23 million Korean adults, every 5 centimeters of fat added to the waistline increases the risk of early death by 10%. Even for people who have a normal body weight, bigger waistlines are linked to an increased risk of early death. Unlike body weight, which includes the weight of muscles, waist circumference is an accurate reflection of abdominal fat distribution. Visceral fat is stored within the abdominal cavity, as well as around important organs like the liver, pancreas, and intestines. It also secretes hormones that trigger inflammation and lead to conditions like diabetes, high blood pressure, and cancer. People in middle age and beyond need to be extra cautious, as a bigger waist circumference sharply increases the risk of early death. Reducing calorie intake by around 30% and doing cardio regularly can help reduce belly fat. But as it takes about 3 months to see the effects, the trick is not to give up. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
Korea is going to launch open banking services starting in December, allowing customers to use a single application to access their accounts at different banks and make payments. A senior official at the Korea Financial Telecommunications and Clearings Institute says computer systems will be built and tested between May and October, and fintech firms will be able to access the system from December. Under the new system, fees are forecast to drop to around 4 cents per transaction, 1/10 of the current level. The South Korean government is conducting a survey into the working conditions of foreign crew members of deep-sea fishing boats. Since Monday, the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries has teamed up with regional offices and seafarers' unions for a month-long joint probe. The team will hold in-depth discussions with foreign crew members and ship owners to check if employment contracts are reasonable and whether there have been any cases of overdue wages or even assault. The survey, conducted since 2013 for the foreign crews of local fishing boats, has been expanded to cover deep-sea fishing boats from this year.
Good morning. It should feel more like early May today. Seoul is likely to have the warmest day of the season so far, with an expected high of 22 degrees Celsius. So that's going to lead to wide temperature differences across the country. And you know, when the sun goes behind the clouds, it will get quite chilly, so beware of that. Meanwhile, Jeju and southern coastal regions will see rainfall from late tonight into early tomorrow morning. It could be lousy with thunder and lightning at times. The rest of the country, however, including here in the capital, is under dry weather alerts again. Regions in the east will see strong gusty winds, so be careful with anything that could cause a spark. Most areas will see highs skyrocketing to the 20s from single-digit morning lows, and there will be less sunshine today, but plenty of good fresh air. Typical spring weather continues with no precipitation in the forecast for the capital area, but temperature differences will also remain wide for the time being. That's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's all we have for now. As we mentioned before, today is the 5th anniversary of the Sewol-ho ferry sinking. So spend a bit of time today, if you can, to think about the victims and also to send your condolences as well to their families who are still suffering to this day. Stay tuned to Arirang TV. We'll have plenty more coverage on the solemn anniversary during our next newscast at noon Korea time with our very own Lee Ji-yoon. So until then, goodbye.